All right, so welcome to another deep dive, everybody. And today we are taking a look at a fascinating story, one that I'm sure many of you are familiar with.
Yeah.
Cain and Abel, those first two brothers.
The OG sibling rivalry.
Right. And, we've got a really interesting source here that's going to help us dig a little deeper into this story.
Yeah, it takes a really interesting psychological angle, especially when it comes to the whole idea of jealousy and,
Oh,
how
yeah.
that plays out.
And the thing that I found really interesting about this particular source is that it's not really focusing so much on like what Cain and Abel offered to God,
Right.
right? Like we all know the story. Cain's a farmer, Abel's a shepherd. They bring their offerings, and God's not so happy with Cain's. But this source really dives into the heart behind the offerings, you know?
Yeah, the motivation, like what's going on beneath the surface.
Exactly, and I think that's where things get really fascinating. So
Oh, absolutely. It adds a whole new layer to the story, doesn't it?
It really does. So what is this source saying about why God favored Abel's offering over Cain's? I mean,
Well, it suggests that Abel, he really went all out, gave his absolute best.
Huh?
The firstborn of his flock, a true sacrifice. Whereas Cain, he offered some of his crops, but it seems like, maybe he held back a little.
oh, so it's like he just gave what was convenient, not really from the heart.
Exactly. It wasn't a true sacrifice. It was more like going through the motions, checking a box, and
Oh, I see. So it wasn't about like crops being bad and livestock being good. It was about
no, not at all.
the attitude behind it.
Exactly. The intentionality and the source connects this directly to the whole idea of jealousy.
Yeah.
Cain sees Abel getting favor, and he just assumes it's about the stuff,
Mm.
the crops versus the livestock. But the source is saying, no, it's deeper than that. It's about the invisible stuff, the attitude.
The heart.
Yeah, the heart.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's powerful stuff. And I think it's so relatable because how often do we get caught up in comparing what's on the outside, you know? Like
Uh.
what people have, what they're achieving,
Mm.
without really seeing all the work that went into it, the effort, the heart.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
That's the trap, isn't it? We
Yeah.
get so focused on the externals, the results, that we miss the internal journey, the struggle, the dedication.
And that's where that jealousy creeps in.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And according to this source, that's the danger zone because jealousy blinds us to the full picture.
Yeah. It makes us resentful without truly understanding, like what's really going on.
Absolutely.
So, okay. So God sees this disparity, right? In the offerings and the heart behind them. He sees what's happening with Cain.
Oh.
But, and this is what I find really fascinating, he doesn't just stay silent, right? Like he doesn't just,
No. He's not passive in this story at all.
okay.
He's very much involved. And the source really highlights that. Oh, yeah, God calls Cain out on his anger. That sullen face he's wearing. And he even warns him, straight up says sin is lurking at the door, tempting you.
Wow. So he's giving him a heads up.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, hey, I see you struggling. I know this is tough, but you have a choice here. It's not a done deal.
Whoa. That changes things a bit, doesn't it?
I think so, yeah.
So it's not like Cain is doomed from the start. It's like God's giving him a chance.
Exactly. An opportunity to recognize that jealousy, to confront it, to choose a different path. And that's a really powerful message because it suggests that we always have a choice.
So it's not predetermined. There's free will involved.
That's the point the source is making, and it's a really important one.
Yeah, because it means that even when we're struggling, we have the power to choose a different outcome.
Absolutely. And that's a message of hope, isn't it?
It really is. And, it makes me wonder if God was so active in Cain's life, what about our lives? Like, are we getting those same warnings?
That's a great question, and one we'll definitely explore further as we dive deeper into this story. But first, let's take a closer look at what happens next with Cain and Abel, because things are about to take a very dark turn.
Yeah, that's right. This is where things get really tragic. And the source doesn't shy away from the consequences of Cain's choices. But it also offers some surprising insights into how we can avoid making those same mistakes.
And I think those insights are more relevant today than ever before, especially in a world where comparison and competition are constantly vying for our attention.
That's a great point, and I think that's what makes this deep dive so powerful. It's not just an ancient story. It's a reflection of our own lives, our own struggles, and ultimately our own capacity for both great love and great destruction.
I couldn't agree more.
So stick with us as we continue to unravel this complex and compelling story of Cain and Abel and discover what timeless lessons it holds for us today.
I can't wait to dig deeper.
Me too.
So yeah, Cain, he doesn't exactly take that warning to heart, does he?
No, he doesn't.
No, he lets that jealousy just fester and grow, and ultimately it leads him down a really dark path.
It really does, and it ends with that that horrific act, the murder of his own brother.
Yeah, it's a tragedy.
Yeah. And it's hard not to feel the weight of that, the consequences of unchecked jealousy, but the source doesn't just stop there.
Right.
It uses this story to talk about something that I think a lot of people can relate to.
Oh, absolutely. Sibling relationships, right.
Yeah, exactly.
It argues that the dynamics between Cain and Abel, they're not just some ancient story. They're like a mirror reflecting the challenges we all face in our closest relationship.
Especially with siblings, because who hasn't felt that pang of jealousy when their brother or sister gets something they want?
Totally. It's a universal experience, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's a new toy, more attention from parents, or even success in their career.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the source is acknowledging that, like, it's normal to feel those things.
Right. It's not about eradicating those feelings altogether. That's unrealistic.
Yeah, it's more about how we manage them, how we prevent them from, like, taking root and poisoning the relationship.
Exactly. It's like a weed in the garden, If you ignore it, it'll just keep growing and eventually take over everything.
Okay, so the source is saying it's normal to feel jealous, even natural sometimes, but then what? What are we supposed to do with those feelings? Bottle them up.
Well, that's usually not the best approach.
Right.
No, the source actually offers some practical advice.
Okay, I like practical. Hit me with it.
And it starts with awareness, with recognizing when those jealous feelings are creeping in and really trying to understand what's at the root of them,
So, like, taking a step back and saying, okay, why am I feeling this way?
Exactly. Is it a legitimate grievance, or is it my own insecurity talking? Am I comparing myself to someone else's highlight reel?
And I think that's so important because sometimes we just react.
Oh, absolutely. We jump to conclusions. We let our emotions run wild. But this source is encouraging us to pause, to reflect, to really examine those feelings before we act on them.
I like that. It's like that classic advice, count to 10 before you say something you'll regret.
Right. And then once we've taken that time to process those feelings, the source suggests we shift our focus.
Okay. Shift our focus to what?
Instead of dwelling on what we lack, what we think we're missing out on, we're encouraged to cultivate gratitude for what we do have.
Focus on the positive, the good stuff.
Exactly. And it goes even further. It suggests that we try to celebrate the successes of others, even our siblings, rather than viewing them as a threat.
That's tough, though, right? Like when you're feeling insecure or competitive, it's hard to be happy for someone else's good fortune.
Oh, absolutely. It's not always easy.
Mm-hmm.
But the source is very clear that this shift in perspective is essential if we want to break free from that destructive cycle of jealousy.
It's like choosing to see the glass half full instead of half empty.
Yeah, and it's not just about our own emotional well-being.
Right.
It's about preserving those precious relationships with our siblings, because jealousy can really damage those bonds.
And that's something that Cain learned the hard way, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, so we've talked about awareness and shifting our focus. Is there anything else the source recommends when it comes to dealing with these complex emotions? Because they are complex.
They really are. And, the source emphasizes the importance of communication.
Okay, communication.
Yeah, honest, open dialogue with the person we're having conflict with.
So like talking it out.
Exactly. But it's not just about venting or blaming. It's about expressing our feelings in a healthy way, without accusation.
Right.
And being willing to listen to their perspective as well.
That can be hard though, right? Especially if there's a history of hurt or resentment. Where do you even begin?
Well, the source suggests starting with humility.
Humility.
Yeah, acknowledging our own role in the conflict, taking responsibility for our actions, even if we feel like we're the one who's been wronged.
So it's not about being a pushover. It's about approaching the situation with a genuine desire to understand and to reconcile.
Exactly. And this is where the source ties it back to those higher values we were talking about earlier.
Right.
It's about aligning our actions with those values. Love, compassion, forgiveness, even when it's really, really difficult.
So it's about choosing to be the bigger person, even when it's hard, even when it hurts.
Exactly. And I think that's a really powerful message.
Yeah, it's like it's really encouraging us to be, thoughtful about our relationships and not just react based on how we're feeling.
Right, to be intentional, yeah.
Intentional, yes. And to try to, like you were saying, align with those higher values, even when it's hard, even when our emotions are telling us to do something else.
Exactly. And it's interesting because the source actually connects this back to the story of Cain and Abel in a really thought-provoking way.
Okay, how so?
Well, remember how God gave Cain that warning, that chance to turn things around?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the source suggests that we also get these warnings in our own lives. maybe not a booming voice from the sky.
Yeah, no burning bushes for me lately.
Right, exactly. But those subtle hints, those gut feelings, those moments where we sense that something's not quite right.
Okay, so like those times when you have a bad feeling about something, but you can't really explain why.
Exactly. Or maybe it's a persistent thought that just keeps coming back to you. Or some wise counsel from a friend or mentor.
So, like, paying attention to those internal nudges, those little red flags that pop up, and not just ignoring them.
Yeah, because those might be our warnings.
It's like our own personal conscience trying to guide us.
Right. And I think the source is saying that we're not alone in these struggles. We have these internal resources, we have guidance from others, and even, a higher power, if that's part of your belief system, to help us through these challenges.
That makes sense, but it's still so easy to ignore those whispers?
Oh, I know. Believe me, I've been there.
Especially when we're so focused on what we want, what we think we need. We don't always stop and ask if it's the right thing to do.
That's so true. And I think the source is reminding us that we have a choice in those moments.
A choice to listen or to ignore.
Exactly. We can listen to those warnings, those nudges, and course correct, or we can just barrel ahead, ignoring the potential consequences.
And in Cain's case, ignoring those warnings led to a devastating outcome.
It did, but the source doesn't end on a completely hopeless note.
Oh, good.
It emphasizes that even when we mess up, even when we make mistakes, it's not the end of the story.
There's always a chance to redeem ourselves.
Exactly. There's always hope for growth, for reconciliation. It's never too late to acknowledge our failings, to try to make amends, to choose a better path.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into the story of Cain and Abel, I think what really stands out to me is that it's not just some ancient tale.
Right. It's a story that's still unfolding today.
Exactly. It's a reflection of the choices we face every single day in our own lives.
And the choices we make have consequences, just like they did for Cain.
But we also have the power to choose differently, to break those cycles of jealousy and resentment, to build stronger, healthier relationships.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really empowering message because it means we're not doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Yeah, we can learn from those mistakes. We can choose a different path.
And we can find hope and healing even in the midst of some pretty difficult circumstances.
Well said. I think that's a great note to end on, and I think that's what makes this story so timeless and so relevant. It reminds us that even amidst all the messiness and complexity of human relationships,
Yeah,
there's always hope for healing, for growth, and for choosing a path that leads us toward love, forgiveness, and genuine connection.
I couldn't agree more.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those warnings in your own life.
Yeah, those little nudges, those gut feelings. What are we trying to tell you?
Until next time, keep diving deep and remember, you're never alone on the journey.